Dear ladies and gentlemen, it's hard to take a floor because my friend Mr. Comenius and the founder of the Holocaust branch here in Slovakia provided a lot of question in his presentation. I'm supposed to talk about two escapees who might be quite unknown to all of you. I don't know if any one of you have heard about them. But they never really survived the great fame. So in comparison to Vrba and Wetzler, who have been hugely documented, and they have self-published a lot of articles, we have quite scarce resources regarding these two. Mr. Rosin and Mordowicz, who was born in Mlava, Poland in 1911. Only a few studies who are dealing with these, and those are handled by very professional historians. To continue what my colleague already said, we have not survived the era. And it's important to say that each of these acts is an act of bravery, which value we can hardly express. Their motivations were also hugely different, but Rosin said it very beautifully. I would rather die escaping than die here in the camp. It is important to say what Mr. Comenius said as well, that in a particular moment, especially in the 60s, there's been a transformation that in 1963 we have a book of Vrba, and the second book came on after by Mr. Wetzler, and in those times Czech historian Erich Kulka found both of them, Rosin and Mordowicz, and made an extensive interview, tens and tens of pages. And then he met with Mordowicz again and continued this interview. And he talked about this interview with the representative of the Central Office of Jews. And in these testimonies we have a different interpretation of how the escape occurred and what is the particular or the very message the world knows regarding Vrba and Wetzler. It doesn't really matter that there are huge deviations which have been of personal character. What is important is the act of bravery, what they did, that they gave the message. We sometimes historians have to ask or put a question mark to each sentence. It doesn't really matter if I'm being suspicious about something at all. So we have basically 4 different reports, and we can reconstruct what we call a report Vrba-Wetzler. All of these two are unknown. I can't really talk a lot about what they have survived in the camp because of shortage of time, but Rosin himself was deported in April 1944 from Žilina. He transferred to Snina-Humene, and 10th of April 1942 he was already in Auschwitz. So he alone got to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where more than 5,000 prisoners were worked, and then he got into the commando. We have 2 Jews from Slovakia, and part of them became the Sonderkommando, so those who were destroying or getting rid of the murdered ones. So he was digging out the huge graves, basically. And that's when he understood, well, he can end very badly. He was very lucky because the people from Commando had a lot of food because they got the food from the murdered ones. And he was able to find a golden chain in bread. he approached one scribe, gave him this chain, and said to the scribe, "Get me out of the commando." This is what saved his life. And then he says the Sonderkommando was all constituted of Jews, and afterwards it was slaughtered altogether. So that there is no message of what happened and what was occurring within the Sonderkommando. So what is important is that he himself, from the beginning, is saying that he was familiar with a lot of prisoners. He was very good friend with Mr. Wetzler, was the best friend in the concentration camp. So he's talking about resistance in the concentration camp, and I would like to quote Mr. Rosin. It was a group of friends. Friend Wetzler, Otto Kraus, Erik Schön, Arnost Schön, Ada Rosenfeld, Honzo Czeslaw, and so on. And we were collecting whatever information we could. We were sharing this information. We were lying to each other that it will be okay. We were helping each friends with a piece of bread, or we're gathering clothes, or better work to our friends. And when they were sick, we hide them from control and so on, until they were healthy again. We were trying to support each other. Wash yourself. Hold your head high. Don't let yourself be beaten. We couldn't help everyone. We were not strong enough to do this. So he created a sort of a group around him. And it's important to say that he himself had a really strong role in his case. So in German camps we have German criminals, and one of them, called Danish, had a positive relationship towards Rosin. And Rosin interpreted very quickly is that he saved Mr. Danish from typhoid disease. And Danish had a responsibility for the whole block, and that's why Rosin could basically do that Vrba and Miller could become scribes, which basically means that they moved further in the chain of the camp and they could survive the situation much better. So Freddy Wetzler and Mr. Rosin sort of moved up these two men to a place where they could survive easily. So 2 months before escape, I would like to quote again Mr. Rosin. What happened is that Wetzler was clearly escaping for escape. He was transferred to a different block because they knew as long as he escapes, Rosin will be affected quite extensively, even by death. So Wetzler was preparing quite a long time. He was constantly gaining information. He was calling with the scribes and other blocks. He was writing down the numbers and tattoo series. He was so good that he remembered by heart all the numbers of the prisoners and from what transport they were from. So after the escape of Mr. Wetzler, when everybody knew that Rosin was Wetzler's friend, Rosin was interrogated in the worst possible case. They knocked his teeth out, and Rosin himself said that one thing that saved him is that if I knew if the Wetzler would escape, I would have escaped with him, because I know that nothing but death awaits me here. Then they left him like that, and then he received a Rotpunkt, a sort of a movement restriction within the concentration camp. So this means he could not go outside for work. So this is basically a place where they were running away from. So this is what you could see in Auschwitz. So the decision to go on with the escape was coming from what I already said, that it's better to die on escape than in the camp. So we're talking about a ward and a scribe and his friend who could help him to get something from Canada. So basically, the man who was working in Canada could help him out with clothes, boots, and so on. And he told him he will help him escape. And Rosin basically remembers that Lužnický and other prisoners were those who helped him to hide in the quarry. This is what Mr. Comenius said. So they were digging themselves in the quarries, 8 prisoners. So without exterior help, they could not achieve this success. So Rosin and Mordowicz used this situation when the transport was coming from Hungary.
Podľa nich masové transporty do Oswiecimu z Maďarska začali 15.5.
So according to them, the mass transport started on 15th of May 1942. So that's why Wetzler could not know anything about them, because they escaped quite sooner. So that's why Rosin and Mordowicz escaped 27th of May 1944. So that means that is exactly 50 days after escape of Vrba-Wetzler. So whether Wetzler or Vrba were successful in escaping, they did not know. They were sure that they were not caught, because if they were caught, they would be dragged into the labor camp, and we know they would be exterminated. So they were successful in leaving the camp, and they met with Mordowicz next to the quarry and used so-called bunker, which was a hole 1.20 meters wide and 1 meter high, which was laid down with wood. So they went into the same bunker that Wetzler and Vrba laid. So that's where they were hidden, and they were covered with sand and alcohol and tobacco, so the dogs could not find them. So their cover was destroyed to such extent that they could not breathe. So what happens is that they could dig themselves out on the first night and use the situation that in the dark they were arriving with the new Jews from Hungary, and this was their opportunity for their escape. It was a huge exemption, because the guard was looking outside of the camp. So you can imagine what I'm talking about. During the day, they were looking inside of the camp, but after the night and the darkness came, all the watch was looking outside, so no one could escape. So originally, they did not want to go to Slovakia. Mordowicz was Polish, and I'm going to Krakow, that's what he said, or somewhere in the area. So on the way to Krakow, they found out that they were getting men for work, so trying to look for rogue soldiers, but they were unable to find them. They lost a lot of food and clothes. So after 3 days, they were necessary to look for some help from outside, look for some people. And they themselves testified that they were so afraid, these people that they met to help them, that they did not want to help them. So they came back from Krakow and decided to risk. They bought tickets to a train, which was totally absurd. In Nový Targ, they went on the train and were headed towards Slovak borders. Rosin says that the train was so full that they had to sit on the roof so they could see if somebody was coming to get them. He himself testifies that what happened is that because the people were getting off the roof, so by the end they said, let's jump off the train, and next to Nový Targ, they didn't really know where they were, and they followed the railway all the way to Slovakia. They know exactly when they came to Slovakia, and this is because they met a farmer after they crossed a river. And this river was called Čierny Dunajec. Thank you very much. And this farmer told him this information. The Allied forces came to Normandy. So they didn't know what kind of allies and where they basically went to. They had no idea what was going on. So they came to a village, Nižná Abša, where one farmer was helping them, and then the Slovak police caught them, and they went to court, and it looked like it was all lost. But thankfully, Rosin met a friend who knew his brother, and this friend helped to get contact with the remainders of the Jewish community, and they told him, they are not refugees, but you are car smugglers. So you just were basically crossing borders and buying cars and gold, and this was what you were living from. This was the testimony from the Jewish community. So the Jewish community gave him dollars. So when they were searched, they could present them with these dollars. So they changed identity completely. Then they came to Liptovský Mikuláš under the police protection. And Rosin said he was shocked because on the station he saw Vrba. So that's when he realized it was probably okay. And they were 8 days in the prison, and that's why we don't know when the further acts occurred. They have no idea when exactly they were writing their testimony. So according to them, they wrote the testimony in Liptovský Mikuláš, where they met with the representatives of the Central Jewish Office, and those two had no interest in what Vrba-Wetzler said, but they wanted to know what happened since the escape of Vrba and Wetzler until their escape in the Auschwitz labor camp. So according to both of them, they gave their testimony, and this short appendix had only few pages. So the Central Jewish Office hadn't changed their identity. He also got an Aryan birth documents. So both of them remember quite well that they met with a rabbi, Weissmandel, who heard their whole story, wrote it down, and sent a report to Switzerland and Turkey. We have no idea what happened to this document. So maybe one more thing, that all four of them, so Vrba, Wetzler, Mordowicz and Rosin, they were moved to Bratislava, and they remained there until the resistance. So Vrba went to Trnava and Wetzler went to Nitra. So Mordowicz and Rosin remained in Bratislava. I will talk about him a little more in a couple of minutes. But let me tell you a couple of things, and very interesting things, what Rosin survived. Because Rosin's rescue in Bratislava was assisted by his Slovak colleague from Snina, who was a Slovak policeman afterwards. Maybe worked even for Slovak Secret Service. So he was a secret policeman, in fact. And Rosin himself wrote in his testimony, Ondráš knew him when he was leaving the tram. So, hey, where are you running? You're running like a Jew, which was basically a stereotype back then. So he really thought it was the end, the police is catching him, and he's gonna get arrested. But it's important to say that Ondráš reacted completely differently, of course. So back then Rosin lived with Vrba, and Ondráš moved in the third room. And because he set a sign on the door, Straßmeister, Ondráš, so basically this meant that these two were safe and nobody intended to search for that flat. He was a very good friend and he helped us a lot. And then afterwards we moved to a bigger apartment. So Ondráš even got a job for him where he could actually work according to his new documents. It's important to say that Ondráš even knew that he was a prisoner from Oswiecim because he saw his tattoo. So the whole winter he was protected by Ondráš. Let me just tell you a conclusion to the story. The story ended tragically. Front came into Bratislava and the last fights in Nazi Germany were occurring. And by that time Ondráš was helping 4 other prisoners. One of the soldiers was injured, but let Rosin finish the story. So I came with Ondráš and we took him to a room. We attended to him medically and then we went outside. The Russian says, "Give me water." But then one soldier says, "Don't go because they're shooting." And then Mr. Ondráš said, "I'm not afraid." He got out and when he went to the outside door, he was shot 3 times and dead on the spot. I wanted to go outside and help him, but my first idea was that I should have fallen instead of him. So basically his savior died on the spot and he survived. So maybe a couple of sentences to Mordowicz. His story is quite interesting because they are running together for Slovak and Polish Jews, which originally they were dedicated to go different ways, of course. It is very important to mention that the representatives of the particular duets, so Mordowicz and Wetzler, they met with the representative of Vatican. We know it from the second book. So Mordowicz remained in Slovakia and he went to Israel in '66 and then to Canada. Mordowicz basically said that the meeting was organized by Kamil Krasňanský and together with Vrba they met in Svätý Jur. According to Mordowicz, it was Burcio. However, when we talk about testimony of Mr. Vrba, we have a different version again. But one thing is very controversial and problematic in terms of Mordovicz's testimony, because he said that he was speaking in French to this representative of Vatican. He was very young back then and he didn't know French, so this is kind of controversial. So large part of the conversation was in French, and Mordowicz says that it was he who was speaking too. So we have a controversial testimony from these 2 people. Just to show you the dramatic effect of his fate, Mordowicz didn't have the luck Rosin had, and he was arrested in Bratislava. Hlinka's guard caught him. He was sitting in a restaurant with Wetzler's sister-in-law, and somebody said that his sister-in-law is Jewish, so somebody had to arrest him. But didn't know he was Jewish because he had Aryan papers. He tried to escape, but he was caught by Hlinka's guard. And then he was caught by police and beaten down So, during this interrogation, he was massacred, in his own words, because he believed he was a Soviet agent, because Mordowicz could not speak Slovak. So he was speaking something between Slovak, Polish and Russian. So that's when Hlinka's guard thought they fought someone from Russia. Then they surrendered him to Gestapo, and they continued with his interrogation. He said that he was very lucky because the number tattooed on his arm was covered by a medical bandage, and he was able to be so agile that they were not able to remove this bandage from his arm, and they did not see this tattoo. Then he was moved to Sphérique and later on to Auschwitz. I decided that in Auschwitz I will throw myself at the first SS representative, I will shoot him and then I will kill myself. Just as the door opened, first prisoner was a Polish prisoner who acknowledged him, and he told him, "We will hide you." And then they really hid him, and even though he had the original number, which was quite damaged, and what he did was that in the train he was biting down on this number so that they could not see him. So basically they re-tattooed his number, and he was saying he could not sustain this pain. So what happened afterwards is that they were able to get him into the transport and transported him to Silesia, where he was working in the working camp Friedland. So the whole story is quite dramatic and interesting, and I'm really sorry. I'm quite blind, so I'm sorry. But Mr. Hlavinka said that he would like me to present here, so I'm sorry. But I cannot really write all this information down because of shortage of time, and I have other responsibilities. So excuse myself. I said already in March that I have so many deadlines that I really cannot make a final work. So I really cannot submit this report. I would just like to say to you, like I already did. So we have two parallel stories. One is very known, the other one is completely forgotten. So I really hope that, at least for you, I have discovered this story. Perhaps some of you have heard about it. But both of these stories are equally strong. They have equal testimonies, and they both show the total bravery to rise against and be a part of the resistance. And without the help of a lot of people, they would not be able to survive. So maybe we can talk about this in discussions in the afternoon. We'll talk about Mr. Todorov Bettenheim, who polemizes how a person behaves in an extreme situation, or Lucifer effect by Mr. Zimbar. So it is a very interesting story. Perhaps us historians are the least capable of